64% of these women had 25-hydroxyvitamin D levels that were less than 30 nanograms per ml. And this again breaks that down into regions, literally every region, from 53% to the Middle East, where the vitamin D deficiency rate was up to 82%. Well, let me just pause and ask, how do we know it's normal? I said 30 nanograms per ml, but some of you may argue with me, as the Institute of Medicine argues with us, that it should be 20 nanograms per ml or 50 nanomoles per liter. So is it 20 or is it 30? Well, I would argue that it's 30. This is, again, work from Heaney, in which he gave a certain group of women enough vitamin D to get their levels over 30 nanograms per ml. And on the right, you can see that these women had much more calcium absorption, 65% greater calcium absorption when their 25-hydroxyvitamin D level was greater than 30 nanograms per ml. And as you would expect, there was an associated reduction in fasting parathyroid hormone. So here's again the concept of a threshold nutrient. Up to a certain point, more vitamin D is good for you. And after a certain point, you've reached that point beyond which you're not going to absorb any more calcium. And this threshold, again from the work of Robert Heaney, seems to be around 30 nanograms per ml or 80 nanomoles per liter. So we are recommending, that is, most professional societies in the world are recommending that we reach, for everybody, a level of 30 nanograms per ml within upper limits of normal, because there's no point in taking more, 50 to 80 nanograms per ml. So this is where we want to be, or a little bit higher. So how do we get there? The recommended daily intake now, this is as of 2010. It is different from what we all learned when we were growing up, when everyone was supposed to take 400. By the way, that's how much there is in a teaspoon of cod liver oil. Now we're saying that all of us under the age of 70 should have 600 units per day, and those of us over the age of 70 should have 800, and with a maximal daily intake of 4,000 units. Now, since vitamin D measurements are not practical because of expense, how do we deal with this problem in Armenia? I don't know exactly how to deal with it, but here's one solution. We could assume that everybody in the country is vitamin D deficient. That's a pretty good assumption. Not everybody, but most everybody. And if you give everybody 2,000 units per day for a couple of months, not dangerous, you will get the levels up to over 30, and then you reduce the amount to what the nutritional recommendations are, which is 600 or 800 units per day. In terms of fracture risk, some studies have found a reduction in fracture risk with supplementation. Others have not, and it really isn't clear, but that isn't the major point. The major point is that we need vitamin D in adequate amounts to absorb enough calcium to stay in calcium balance. Okay, so here are my last points. Good nutrition in childhood and throughout life is a key to optimal skeletal health. Poor calcium intake and vitamin D deficiency in childhood could lead to suboptimal skeletal calcium and contribute to osteoporosis later in life. Vitamin D sufficiency is a key element to good skeletal health. And in fact, there is an epidemic of vitamin D deficiency and thus calcium deficiency throughout the world. What can we do? Pediatricians and nutritionists in Armenia, pay attention to calcium and vitamin D. Make sure your children are getting enough exercise. What can we do as primary care physicians in Armenia? pay attention to calcium and vitamin D and make sure that your patients are getting enough exercise. You've seen this picture before. This is our medical center, and I want to thank you very much for your attention.
Mikrofonat seviyede.
Շատ շնորհակալություն ելույթի համար։ Ես չգիտեմ դուք ինչքանով եք ծանոթ հայացքին, որը տեսել է զրկակի մեջ, պատերազմի մեջ, եղել են սով։ Եվ մեր այդ սովի տարիների մանկական հասակում ծնված երեխաները հասու տարիքից չեն ունեցել օստեոպարոզ։ Դա մեկ, եւ երկրորդ հարցը օստեոպարոզը հիմա մենք տեսնում ենք այն տարիքի մարդիկ, ովքեր որ սովետական տարիներին եղել են բավարարված եւ սուտը եղել է բավարար։ Ինչպես կբացատրեք դա։ Շնորհակալություն։
Well, your first comment about children living through times of hardship, of course, I know that. I don't mean to say that everyone is going to get osteoporosis if they've had difficulties in childhood. I mentioned that 60 to 80% of our skeletal future is determined by our genes, so you can't predict. All I'm saying is that it is very much more likely for someone to be at risk for osteoporosis if they haven't reached optimal peak bone mass. And your point about the Soviet Union, well, again, it's the same point. It's a very important factor in skeletal health. It doesn't mean that someone who's been raised in poverty is necessarily going to get osteoporosis, nor does it mean that someone who has been nutritionally enriched is not going to get osteoporosis. So I hope you don't misunderstand what I was trying to say. This is all a matter of maximizing your potential for optimal skeletal health.
Is there any marks or signs that can tell us about number of calcium in our organism without giving some laboratory test?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. No. We have some measurements. We have bone density, which measures calcium in bones, which is where most of our calcium is. And as Kim mentioned, there is now great capability of measuring skeletal calcium here in Yerevan through the bone density instruments that we brought. We also have instruments in Gyumri, we have an instrument in Karabakh, and we will be bringing 2 more machines, one for Banazor and one for Kapan this fall. So yes, the answer to your question, you can do that. If you were asking a more specific question, is there a way of determining skeletal mass calcium? The answer is no, that's a research test. You have to do neutron activation analysis, and only in very special research centers is it possible. But for practical purposes, the bone density test is pretty good to get at your question.
Շատ շնորհակալություն, որ դուք ներկայացրեցիք կալցիումի այդքան կարևորությունը մեր օրգանիզմի համար, բայց հայտնի է նաև ամբողջ աշխարհում, ինչպես նաև դա դասագրքային տվյալ է, որ կալցիումի ավել քանակը հատկապես մեր տարիքում կարող է առաջացնել աթերոսկլերոզ։ Իսկ արյան ճնշման բարձրությունը եւ սրտային հիվանդությունները շատ ավելի բարձր տեղում են համաշխարհային հաշվումներում, քան օստեոպարոզը։ Այդ մասին ինչ կասեք, ինչպիսի հետազոտություններ ունեք։
Yeah, thank you for that question. This is extremely controversial about whether calcium is bad for your heart or your cardiovascular system. And I made a small comment about that. Most of the data argue that when calcium is given in moderation, and when I mean moderation, no more than a total intake of 2.5 grams per day, there is no evidence that calcium causes atherosclerosis. In certain studies, when people were taking much more calcium, then there was a relationship. So it's like anything. Moderation is the key. Too much of anything can be bad for you.
Thank you very much. Գիտեմ, որ ավելի հարցումներ կան, խնդրում եմ, որ գրեցեք, որտեղ վերջում ունենանք 30 րոպեի ազատ ցանկացած հարցում, ցանկացած ելույթ ունեցող խոսողներին համար։ Ես կուզենայի յետևի շարքի բարոն Ժիշկին շնորհակալություն հայտնել այդ վիտամին C հարցումը, որ հարցուցիկ քարտոշկային հետ, մենք նոր ճշտեցինք, տարբերությունները այնքան հսկա չեն, այսինքն այդ գեղևի մեջը ավելի կա այո, բայց ավելի այսինքն երկու անգամ ավել չէ։ Մենք պիտի մի հատ սլայդը հիմա շինենք, ես եւ դոկտոր Քաբեսը, որ ցերեկվա բոլորին ցույց տանք ինչ ենք նայել։ Գուզենայի ասել, որ վիտամին C քարտոշկայի մեջ այնքան մեծ տարբերություն չկա, ինչքան կա տարբերությունը ֆոլատի եւ երկաթի։ Ստացվում է, որ գեղևի մեջը բավականին ավելի շատ ֆոլատ եւ երկաթը կա, եւ մենք դա ցույց կտանք սլայդի մեջ ցերեկվա, ուզում եմ երկաթն ու ֆոլատը ասեմ որպես introduction to the next speaker today. I want to introduce Dr. Omar Dari to the audience. And this is how I want to introduce him at first, and then I'll talk about his professionalism. 4 years ago, Dr. Richard Deckelbaum invited me to Palestine, to Ramallah, Palestine, for a conference that he was organizing there, where Dr. Dari was a speaker. And I was only in Ramallah, Palestine for 2 days. I had the opportunity to have 2 or 3 meals with Dr. Dari. After the first 15 minutes of speaking with Dr. Dari, I said out loud to him and to Dr. Deckelbaum, I've got to get this guy to Armenia. Because he is very intelligent, very thoughtful, and his approach to thinking about nutrition is, in my mind, very inspiring. He is a biologist and a biochemist by training. He has worked as a professor, a researcher, a consultant, and currently is a senior nutritionist at the United States Agency for International Development. He is not with us today representing USAID, but rather has come as a volunteer because Richard Deckelbaum and I so very much wanted him to come here so that we could ask our questions to him that we have had over the years of our visits to Armenia. So without further ado, please let me welcome Dr. Omar Dari from the United States. Thank you.
everyone. I really appreciate the introduction that Kim made for me. I don't think I deserve that, but it's a pleasure to be in Armenia. I have been here for 2 days, and the country has really impressed me a lot. The landscape, the sightseeing, the people, the history that this country has is really amazing. And I really feel honored and very lucky to be here with you today. I will talk about iron and folate. But first, some disclaimers. The first one is that I'm not an expert in iron and folate, but only a professional working in public health programs who is trying to understand the reasons and origin of our current recommendations. And here I would like to take a little anecdote. It is type of a joke. He says that the mother was teaching the daughter how to make a special type of meat. And he asked the daughter to come and said, you come here and first cut this side of the meat, and then you cut the other side. Then you put the meat into the pan. Then the daughter asked the mother, why you are cutting these 2 pieces? What is the reason of that? And then she asked, or she responded, I don't know. Let's ask my mother, your grandmother, what is the reason of this cutting of the thing? And the grandmother was still alive, and then went and asked her, Mother, come tell us why you are cutting these 2 pieces. And she said, it's because the pan I was using was too small, and the meat could not go in. And that is what happened mainly when we repeat the recommendations by any of the international institutions. Those recommendations are for us to have as a guide. Those are not things that we need to accept without thinking what are the reasons. And that is what I have really approached my professional life. I can adopt the things if I'm convinced of those things. If I'm not convinced, I try to find the reasons. And I have found in my life that there are not many reasons around the recommendations. And what I was telling you, let's think critically. And if that does not convince you, try to see what are the reasons. That does not mean you need to follow whatever it says to us. Another disclaimer is something that I will say probably do not make sense to you. Please tell us, or please tell me so. As I said before, I'm not an expert in the field, and probably in the audience there are persons who knows much more than I in iron and folate. But let's discuss our truth in quotation marks, because our truths are limited by the advance in the reduction of our ignorance. That means many of the recommendations were made 20, 30 years ago, accordingly with the principle that we had at that time. Many of these things have changed, which means let us change also whatever we are following as recommendations. We are going to do accordingly with our actual knowledge. Probably in the future, our descendants are going to tell us, you were crazy doing these things. But what's the best thing that we can do at this moment? And the final one, I am happy to be here for learning of the science and experiences of many of you, especially those working with realities. When we work in centers, we work in universities, we sometimes are out of the reality. And we come and do recommendations that are completely out of what is possible to do. That is why it's important that those really working in the field could also present their points of view. With these disclaimers, let me present what I'm going to give in this talk. First, I'm going to speak what are the consequences of iron and folate deficiency. Probably many of you already know, but let's repeat for those who probably are not so familiar with it. I will provide some examples of corrections of those deficiencies. Then the question is, are there adverse effects due to excesses of iron and folate? We will look at that. Are there biomarkers that will tell us the iron and folate status? They are there, and I will try to describe what the principles are coming. Then the question is, how much is too little and how much is too much? Exactly following John with the principles of moderation. Everything is bad in excess. If you take a lot of water, you can die, which is part of the thing. The other point is, if after all these things, then we need to respond to ourselves how to add additional amounts of these two nutrients in a safe and efficacious manner. And finally, questions and discussion. Let's start with anemia. When we measure anemia, the first thing is because it's iron deficiency anemia. And we make the two things that were the same. And we are repeating the same thing because 50 years ago, when the people was studying anemia in the developed countries, they found that anemia, most of them, was due to iron deficiency. They thought that the rest of humankind was the same, and everyone is going to be iron deficient when they have anemia. But it looks like the humanity is more complex than the people in the universities in some very rich countries. The anemia could be for many deficiencies of nutrients. Iron deficiency, B12 deficiency, folate deficiency, vitamin A deficiency, vitamin B2 deficiency. But that is only the nutritional part. We have the parasitic infections. We have malaria, we have hoodworms, schistosomiasis, even these normal helminths that do not let us to absorb iron. We have other diseases, HIV, bacteremia, many others. If we are a woman or we are a man, we have a very different thing. The ladies need a lot more iron than the men. We have the genetic disorders. We have thalassemia in this region. We have sickle cell anemia in Africa. And in this picture, we have not included contamination. We have lead, we have arsenic, which means that when we measure anemia, it's very easy to measure, but it's very difficult to interpret it and to understand. Probably we don't have a clue what is the reason the anemia is there. And we need to find why is the anemia in order to select the correct interventions. But this talk is not about anemia. This talk is about iron deficiency, which is beyond the synthesis of hemoglobin that in the case of iron is important. Okay, let's something fast about iron deficiency. Dr. Deckelbaum here already presents the anemia troubles, tiredness, lack of energy, but that is only part of why the lack of iron is going to provoke in us. We have also a lot of enzymes that we detoxify a lot of the contaminants that we absorb. We have impairment of the immunological response. And what's very important, and the example I'm going to use, is the irreversible cognitive retardation. If there is iron deficiency before the 2 years of life, it's not going to be corrected. The child will be no anemic after that, but he loses completely the development of the neurons before 2 years of life. Then anemia and maternal mortality when the anemia is severe. This is only a simple example I'm going to use, by the coincidence was similar to the one used by Dr. Richard Deckelbaum. He presented to us that 20 years ago in Guatemala it was an association, that iron deficiency was also linked to the reduction of IQ. This case is a study published a few weeks ago. It was in China. It was in a community which was iron deficient with high anemia. That means it's trying to see under those conditions what is going to happen if iron supplement is given during pregnancy, giving 90 milligrams of iron a day together with 400 micrograms of folic acid. And then when the child is born, starting at the 6 weeks of age until the 9 months, giving also an iron 1 milligram per kilogram. And they also did a study using a placebo. The values there are negative, because it means, which is the not development of the physical activity. In this case, is this motor development. If the number is larger, which is more negative, means that the development of that physical characteristic that was measured was the worst. And immediately you can see that in order for children to have a good development at 9 months of age, they need to receive iron. It was not sufficient that the mother received iron during pregnancy. those children, those mothers that receive iron, the children were with lower problems of anemia for the kids, but was not sufficient for protecting the kids not to develop in a good way if they need the iron in the moment after they were born. That does not mean that the kids need to have iron at the very young weeks of life. It only means if those kids are born in a society which is iron deficient, then iron is needed. If the kid is born from a mother which is healthy and the environment is healthy, you don't need this intervention. The only conclusion of this study is that iron is important, and it confirms that iron is needed for mental development. Now let's move that we are talking here about the iron during pregnancy. What is happening during the pregnancy and iron? The woman should start pregnancy with a storage of 500 milligrams of iron. That means that the prevention is before conception. The woman needs to have good diet during the adolescence time, that at the moment they are become pregnant, they have sufficient iron in the storage. There is no way they are going to win that during the 9 months during the pregnancy. But during pregnancy, they need to have twice to 2.5 times more iron, and that needs to come during the pregnancy period, from 480 to 1,150 milligrams of additional iron. Why they need that? Because they are making a new human being. They are going to transfer their blood and their iron and many other things into the fetus and to the new child. The woman transferred to the fetus during the last 10 weeks of the gestation 270 milligrams of iron, which is 5.6 milligrams of iron per day. It's not continuing, but that is the calculation. That is what we talk about the delayed cord clamping, because it's through the blood. If the cord is closed before it's still working, that is letting the kid not to receive sufficient blood for the first 6 months of life. When the cord is clamped after it starts the pulsation, that means 30% more volume of the blood of the kid, 60% more of the iron in the red blood cells, which is at the end 75 milligrams of iron. A lot of the iron is to the moment of the birth. Now let's talk a little about what is the needs of iron of the woman. In this case, in the 3rd trimester, when this is the fast growing of the fetus. If the diet is, in that moment, the mother requires between 3 to 8 milligrams of iron per day. If we assume that the bioavailability of that diet is 5%, the amount of iron in the diet should be between 60 to 160 milligrams of iron per day, which is a huge amount of iron that the diet is not going to supply. If the diet is 10% bioavailable, that requires the woman between 30 to 80 milligrams of iron a day. But if the diet has 20% bioavailability, the amount of iron in the diet should be between 15 to 40 milligrams of iron per day. When the recommendations were done, they assumed 10% bioavailability. That is why it's the recommendation of 60 milligrams to 90 milligrams of iron per day. They didn't know about the exceeding, that was the control of the metabolism of iron. And when the mother is under this condition, the absorption of iron is much better than the absorption of iron in a normal woman, which probably during pregnancy is not 10% bioavailability, even in the same diet, but more. That means it is why now, instead of the 60, probably it's recommended 20 to 30. But we understand that that is because the women under those conditions can absorb more iron than a non-pregnant woman. Another interesting point is that all this iron needs to be, a lot of iron needs to be transported to the fetus and to the new child. And that in the human being is through the placenta. And there is a lot of receptors that collect the iron and transport to the fetus. And that is one receptor I'm going to mention here among the many others, is the proton-coupled folate transporter. That transports iron. But the interesting fact is that the same receptor is 100 times or 2 magnitudes more, with more higher affinity for folate. which means that also folate is very important and is transported to the fetus. Now let's move to folate. Why, if iron is important, let's see what happened with folate. Many of you have seen this probably when we were studying biochemistry or physiology in university. What is the roles of folate in the system? And we don't explain all of this, but only the folic acid that is at the top is not the vitamin. Folic acid is very oxidized. That needs to be reduced to folate. And for that, we need niacin. And the hydrofolate needs to be reduced more to the tetrahydrofolate, which is another niacin. Then we have this circle, that you need B6, and we need B2, in order to synthesize the purines that are going to be the molecules that are going to make the DNA and the RNA. We need also to transform part of the uracil into thymidine to make that part of the DNA, and that is all the synthesis of the new cells. The folate is key in the cell replication. But in the other part, in the right part of this graph, we have the methylation circle, that also we need folate as a way to supply methyl groups to many molecules, to proteins, to carbohydrates, to lipids. And in that way, they work in conjunction with vitamin B12, vitamin B2, and the vitamin B6. What I'm trying to say is that we focus on only one nutrient, but it's the interaction in many others that we need. And for many years we know that giving a lot of folic acid, we can mask the anemia provoked for vitamin B12 deficiency, because there is not going to have megaloblastic anemia, but not all the consequences of vitamin B12 deficiency. And many of those are neurological. And that is the fear, that giving too much folic acid, we are going to obscure one of the symptoms of vitamin B12 deficiency. And that is why we need to keep an equilibrium. But the summary of this graph is that folate is really important to cell replication, to development, and also to keep our DNA in good condition. What happens when there is insufficient folate? And I put in parentheses, and B12 deficiency, because they don't work alone. And Dr. Deckenbaum already mentioned to us the spina bifidus neural tube defects, and that happened in the first 48 days after conception, which means in a period of time that probably the mother didn't know that she is pregnant. All the folic acids and all the iron that is taken during pregnancy is not going to correct this. The folate needs to be previous to be pregnant. And that means that every one of us should have a good folate status, not waiting to be pregnant. And what happened with neural tube defects, you can see the list there that also Dr. Deckenbach already mentioned. But also folate produces other things. This is not only neural tube defects. That could have fetal growth retardation because of cell replication, lower weight, preterm delivery, the macrocytic anemia, megaloblastic anemia that we already mentioned, and also because it's important to keep the DNA structure. If that is not happening well, we can develop cancers, leukemia, lymphomas, colorectal cancer, breast cancer, prostate, and others. I mean, that is why having a good status of folate is not only for the new kid, but for every one of us. But now, let's see, most of the attention to folate is for the prevention of neural tube defects. And then let me tell very fast the history of that. It was a person, I don't remember, in the UK or Ireland, that they noticed that some of the women were having a lot of more prevalence of incidence of neural tube defects, but others not, coming from the same communities. And that person, that physician, thinks this is need to come from the diet. Something here is affected. And they started doing some type of experiments to improve the diet. The first one there, 1966 and before, they look multivitamins, including folic acid, and they reduced neural tube defects from 470 per 10,000 pregnancies to 70. That's a very successful thing. And immediately the link was put into the folic acid, which is going to become folate. And there was an inter-country study. 8 different countries did that work and trying to reduce the recurrence of kids with neural tube defects from mothers that already weren't affected. And they did an experiment a lot of multivitamins without folic acid, some multivitamins with folic acid, and only folic acid. And then immediately saw that folic acid alone was working fine. From 423 per 10,000, they were reduced to 78. That was the people were so happy that we already found the way to reduce neural 2 defects. But if you see the column of multivitamins without folic acid, they reduce that by half, which means that not all the neural 2 defects are related to folate. Those were related to other things and to other vitamins that were present in that compound, and probably was B12. But then the attention switched from nutrition to pharmacological treatment, because the beginning was to improve the diet. But they did experiment in this way because it was easy to supply supplement and supply food. But that's an experiment. But the conclusion from that point is folic acid is a miraculous substance, and we can give everyone that in order to prevent neural 2 defect, which is fine if the diet is low in folate. Some of the ladies who are metabolically need more folate into the system. In Ireland, it's a study that almost no one mentioned. It was in similar years. Instead of the 4,000 macrons of folic acid, they provide 360. And the impact was the same. Then why 4,000 and the other 360? 4,000 was because at that time there were no supplements with 400, but only supplements with 4,000. That was a simple thing like that. Then immediately many medical societies made the recommendation that every woman before conception should receive 400 macrograms of folic acid per day prior to conception. But that 400 macrograms of folic acid came from a nice compromise. They cannot say 4,000, 360 probably work, let's say 400. And the recommendation went there without scientific evidence. If you look, the recommendations are before the experiments. But the work was done after. Let's say if we say 400, now let's prove that that 400 works. If you see the black line there, is a study in Hungary that was before the 400, in this case was 800 macrons of folic acid. And what they did in Hungary was to prevent the first occurrences of neural 2 defects. That means they were not treating women that were affected by kids with neural 2 defects. They were treating a group of women that they didn't know if they were with certain characteristics of having that abnormality, one control and another not control. And they immediately saw that in that population, from 29 per 10,000 neural 2 defects, now they went 0 after a certain period of time, giving 800. That is why you have the black line going to the right. In China, our colleagues from the CDC went to very big type of studies, and they are going to prove that 400 macrons of folic acid work. In the north part of China, with the diet is based on rice, they don't have folates as one of the supplies of the diet. And in that part of the country, 67 of every 10,000 pregnancies were affected by neural 2 defects. After a certain period of time, that was reduced to 7, giving 400 macrons of folic acid. And this is a marvelous impact, providing 400 macrons of folic acid to the women. That reduced in that amount this problem. And that was really something to prove. In the southern part of the country, the problem was not too large. The diet was better. Instead of 67, it was only 10 per 10,000. They gave the 400 macrons of folic acid, and they reached to 6. That means that in the two areas of the country, they reached the same plateau. Beyond that, other things are affecting neural 2 defects. It's not more related to folate, but to other reasons. But at the same period of time, that was this type of discussion, quite a bit folic acid, that folic acid could cause other problems, because if this is a replication, folic acid could trigger cancers, because also many of the drugs that we use for prevention of cancer is anti-folate, because we don't want that it's a replicate. At that moment, many of the colleagues said, we suggest that the child prevention now on the way in China should be modified to contain several other arms, at least one with 200. That was never done. Probably 100 could work. That was never done. And that is why until this moment we are still using 400. Because that was the experiment and that was the evidence, which shows that indeed that works. But that will not prove that lower amounts are going to work. But that is what happened. But let me now show a country that has been an example. Folic acid in the wheat flour has been very good impact in Canada, in the United States, in Chile, in South Africa, and Costa Rica. I presented here the data of Chile. The blue columns are the neuralgic defect prevalence before fortification of adding folic acid to the wheat flour. And you can see 16 to 18 per 10,000. Once folic acid was added into the wheat flour, now it has been reduced to around 8 to 7. And they cannot go below because in the genetics of that population, that is why it's not going to go down. But it has been stable. The country has a very strong monitoring system that you see in this graph until the year 2009, and they have continued, that they really have kept the success. But then you look the title of this figure here, the concentration of folic acid into the flour, into the chili is 2 milligrams per kilo. The average intake of flour in those women is 200. If you multiply 2 or 200 is 400. They are using wheat flour as a supplement. Everyone from the moment of the birth until they die in Chile, they are receiving the equivalent of 400 macrons of folic acid per day. Now the question is that safe or that is unsafe? And some groups are starting to do some work, and they did some work I'm going to mention in a minute. But the interesting part of folic acid is one of the nutrients that could be a little sensitive to changes when it is added into the flour. But sufficient remains. When we put nutrients into the flour, with the exception of B1 and some part folic acid, the others are very stable. That means the same nutrients that we put into the fortification are the same nutrients that probably are mostly in the foods, and some of them are lost during the cooking, but a lot of them survive in sufficient content. And that is very nicely seen in the increment of serum folate in the population of Chile. In this case, are women of reproductive age. What the columns are telling us here, the green part is the distribution of serum folate before food fortification, and the red one is after fortification. And you can see that the Chilean population was from the left to the right. Now they have a lot of serum folate in circulation. And I add some vertical lines there. The red one says deficiency, because we know that that concentration of folate, serum folate in the plasma is deficient. Part of the women in Chile were already folate deficient at that time, at least 10%. They were at the moment to have megaloblastic anemia. In the middle are the risk to neural tube defects. That is around, in this case, 7 to 8 micrograms per liter of serum folate. That is associated to the risk of having a kid with neural tube defects in those women who have the genetics with that problem. But that means that most of the population of women in Chile, before fortification, they were at risk of neural tube defects. And now that we move to the right, we have excess. There is a number, this is still a number as a reference, in this case it's around 20. Beyond that, we can say it was an excess of intake of folic acid. And some of the women in Chile were already having an excess of folic acid. That means that Chile used wheat flour as a way to replace a supplement. But probably we were thinking the 400 macrograms per day as something that we need to look and do it. But because now the impact is already good, no one in Chile wants to reduce the concentration of the folic acid into the flour. Because if they reduce the concentration, and for some reason there is a woman with a neural tube defect, they can claim that it's because the government reduced the folic acid into the content of the flour. This is a big problem, because when we do this national type of programs, we need to start conservative. We start with slow amounts, we monitor. Then we add a little more amount and we continue monitoring until we reach the plateau. At that moment, we stopped the addition of more of the nutrients into the product. Because the enthusiasts, we can start with the highest. Once we start in the highest, and this is a good product, we cannot go down because the population will not accept that. But we are in a trouble. What if that high intake of folic acid indeed is causing problems? That is the big question. Despite that uncertainty, the country is still keep the same concentration because they think they did a good thing. In these studies that they related neural tube defects with red blood cell folate as well as plasma folate, you can see these two graphs. Those are epidemiological studies. In the bottom part is the concentration of folate either in red blood cells or in plasma. And in the vertical axis are the neural tube defects. And we can see very clearly here that a higher the concentration of folate, either in the red blood cells or in the plasma, the minimum the risk to get and killed with a neural tube defect. And that is when the different cutoff points is coming. Now we know certain associations between the concentration of folate in the blood and the reduction of neural tube defects. That is, we can follow and measure serum or red blood cells in the folate in the red blood cells, and we can predict if that population is going to be or not at risk of neural tube defects. This is the same data of Chile, the data of the United States, is the cumulative distribution of plasma folate before and after fortification. And the cumulative is a cumulative 6. You see the pink graph is the distribution of serum folate in the government of Chile before fortification. And I put a line of minimum there. The proportion of the population below that minimum, it means the proportion of the population at risk of having neural tube defects before fortification. And that's not going to affect everyone. It's going to affect the women who have the genetic propension to have that type of problem. But in this case, it's around 70%. That is why it was so wise to add folic acid into the flower in Chile. The blue lines is the United States, more or less in the same situation. Two highly developed countries, but they have one property in common. They don't eat beans, they don't eat lentils, they don't eat chickpeas, which means they were folate deficient. And that is something that is important to keep in mind. The United States put folic acid into the flour, 1.4 milligrams per kilogram, and they eat less flour than in Chile, and that is why the red line is in the middle. And you can see that the distribution moved to the right, and there is small proportion of the population in the United States is below the minimum cutoff point, which means that the population is protected, which was the amount of folic acid put into the system in the United States. It's around 100 to 150 macrons per day. This graph is teaching us that that amount in the United States was sufficient to correct folate deficiency and sufficient to provide sufficient folic acid to the population to be protected. In the case of Chile, I already explained before, they moved completely to the right. Of course, they protect the population, but now we have a vertical line that says excessive. In this case, 30% of the women in Chile are already receiving more than plenty folic acid. If the folic acid will not make any additional adverse effects, that would be fine. But what if there is adverse effects? That means that one country is fine in the United States, the other was moving too much, and let's see if there is some deficiencies there. In the United States, you can see the point at the middle of the 30, that you have a plateau. That means that the source of folic acid is not only the wheat flour, but also the population that is consuming supplements. In the United States, the women who are high intake of folic acid is not coming from wheat flour, it's coming from supplements. Because there is the two type of interventions working together, and no one has telling the women in the United States, that's sufficient in your diet, you don't need to continue doing the other. But the two are still there. Okay, let's move. If we try to go back and put in folate in the case of nutrition, not in the area of pharmacological part. This is based in serum folate. in Chile, United States, Costa Rica, the West Bank, Palestine, and Ecuador. You see that the base is different because the diet is different. In Costa Rica and in the West Bank, the people in Costa Rica eat beans, and in the West Bank they eat chickpeas. That means a much better situation than in Chile or the United States. The objective is moving that average around 25. And you can see that once with folic acid into the flour, both the United States and Costa Rica are already corrected that deficiency. They could be happy. In Chile it was a little too much. And in Ecuador, I'd say 14, because we don't have the after. And that was evidence to tell the Ecuadorians that they could have an evidence, and putting some folic acid into any way will help them to reduce neural tube defects. The important point here is that the first graph was for women, but in the same study in Ecuador, when they analyzed the serum of the kids below 5 years of age, the serum folate was 25, which means that in the same members of the family, there are different type of criteria. We cannot use the same criteria for everyone because we are changing our metabolism along the life cycle, specifically here with folate, and I will to show you something later. Because folic acid has been so good, now we are having the intention to put folic acid everywhere. And we are putting folic acid also into micronutrient powders. Because probably that will be helpful, because if that is helping the woman, it's going to help also the kids. Are we sure about that? And we absolutely very certain that additional folic acid into the kids, first is needed, and second is safe. And I'm going to move now into the adverse negative consequences of using excessive amounts either of iron or folic acid. Now this is PEMBA study. Probably many of you know the PEMBA trial. The PEMBA trial was done in Pemba, an island in Tanzania, trying to see if zinc could really help to reduce mortality. Because vitamin A reduces mortality. Now we have an intention to fight magic bullets. We have another nutrient. Let's put a lot of zinc and see what is reduction. And they did a study where they put iron, folic acid, and vitamin A with and without zinc. And the trial was stopped because what they found is that the groups that were treated with iron and folic acid in combination, they were having a higher morbidity and mortality due to malaria parasite and other infections. And that stopped the trial. And from that moment, the WHO says, in Africa, when you do iron, don't do too much iron if you are not certain that you are with an anemia. And with folic acids, they said that there is no reason to put folic acids in Africa because there is not folic deficient in the children. But no one until this time is certain what was the reason. This is a summary done by Dr. Robert Black from Johns Hopkins a few months ago. And it summarizes the adverse effects for the excessive amounts of folic acid and iron together. We cannot separate any of the two. Any type of parasitemia, we have risk rate of 1.13. That means the infections were higher. We have clinical malaria is 1.16 and also was statistically significant. Other trials did the same. The conclusion of this is that we are forgetting that we are a living being among many others. And many others are also needing nutrients. Our parasites are very happy if we feed them well, because they are parasites, which means that we put many of these things, in not only these two, they are going to be beneficial. That means we need to have an equilibrium that we human beings develop in an environment with other living beings, and we need to have an equilibrium. We survive because we have certain traits that make us to fight those parasites. But in some moment, we need to be careful with that. The conclusion of this is we need to give iron, we need to give folic, but in a certain amount that is needed. Don't go beyond, because the ones who are going to be beneficial are the ones who are attacking us. But you can think that malaria there is not in Armenia. Okay, well, but it's not the only problem. Recent studies, now only with iron, not with folic acid. giving the micronutrient supplements in Pakistan and in other countries, they look and do the study, and they found that the diarrhea increased when the micronutrient powder contained high amount of iron. They have diarrhea with blood, and they have severe diarrhea, which means that also again, when we look of all these our interventions, we need to look everything. We need to look the quality of the diet, but also we need to look the hygiene of the environment, because other things are there ready to take advantage of our good diet. And it's something that we need to put in equilibrium. Another study of this is why was those diarrhea. This study was done by the colleagues in the University Technical Institute of Zurich in Kenya, and they do the microbiota of the kids of Kenya, and they saw each one of these squares is telling you how the different type of microorganisms in the intestines change, adding a different way, some different nutrients into the diet. In this case, the nutrient was to micronutrient powders, and was iron specific. Anything, all the pathogenic bacteria that were added for iron, which are the pathogenic ones, they bloom. Those who are beneficial for us, and we call probiotics, and were part of that, they were in an environment that was negative. The conclusion of this is that the iron that we are giving, if we don't absorb, is going to go into the large intestine, and if the large intestine contains these pathogenic bacteria, they are going to grow. And that is why we need to keep also again an equilibrium in our interventions. The kids is going to be benefit with iron, because otherwise they are not going to have a good development of the brain, but we need to be certain that that kid is also free of pathogenic bacteria and other parts. Otherwise, we could do something that is not absolutely correct. In the case of folic acid, let's move a little bit. The people were thinking that probably it's going to trigger cancers, because folic is needed for cell replication. And that was found at the beginning of the programs, both in the United States, the top graph, as well as in Canada, the first one, the United States and Canada at the top. It was a temporal increment in cancers in the colon. And that could be logical, because if the persons or the population of these two countries were already coming to have some cancers, if something is given for the cancer cells to replicate, they're going to replicate. And that was that increment. But that was temporary. After the equilibrium pass, after the folate is going to be protected the future generations of cancer of the colon, because now the DNA is in a better shape, now the reduction of colon cancer in both countries are coming down. Other potential risks with the excess of folic acid is the masking of megaloblastic anemia that I'm going to mention in a few minutes. It could be antagonist of malaria drugs, of cancer drugs, but I don't think it's the case, because for that you need very high concentrations, and we are not using those. I mean, that will be eliminated this way with anti-cancer and others. There is some risk, but there is no risk if we put the correct amount. The risk is when we try to do more than needed. This is again the case of Chile. They were doing additional studies because the masking of the vitamin B12. What this study is saying to us? The first column, folate deficiency of folate, nothing. There is no folate deficiency in Chile anymore. I mean, it's less than 0.1%. And we is very clear, this is receiving a lot of folic acid. The one in the middle with green is the proportion of the population with high concentrations of serum folate. It's 16%. But now we understand why. Because they are having a large supply of folic acid. If they reduce, that is going to come down. Now the important question is, which is the proportion of that population with B12 deficiency that we are not identifying with megaloblastic anemia? It was 6%. And having the two things together, high concentration of folate in the serum, and at the same time, low concentration of B12 in the serum, was 1%. It looks little 1%, but 1% is 10 in 1,000, is 110,000, which means large numbers could become important, especially in the elderly population. In this case, probably what Chile should do is reduce the concentration, the content of folic acid into the flour and add B12 because we need the balance. But the country is afraid because they already achieved RAL2 defects in a very low concentration. But that is something for everyone of us to keep in mind. Let me now to generalize. What we are in nutrition, we have a basal type of intake of the nutrients. If that diet is insufficient, we need to add something. That additional amount is going to be put in addition to what we have in the diet. Then the total is the one who is going to make us to have the benefit or to have the adverse effect. Is the diet plus the intervention. The total of that, if that is beyond the threshold, Dr. John was telling us, if it is below the threshold, we are going to have a response. Isn't the threshold, there's nothing is going to happen. Is beyond the threshold, we are going to have adverse effects. And we can look that with a series of indicators. We have exposure indicators that are associated to intake. But we wanted to have something functional. We can go to metabolic biomarkers that will take us the status. And finally, we can have something about function. And we go to tissues to see what the organism is working. And the final one at the very high level is the physiological changes, reduction of RAL2 defects, improvement on the IQ, physical endurance, and this kind of things. And let me say what we are doing in nutrition when we have deficiencies. We have a way to deliver the nutrient. We have an amount of the vehicle that we are going to provide the nutrients. The concentration of that nutrient in that vehicle, if we multiply that, we have the additional intake. That is the thing we are adding. But the additional intake is not sufficient. If we be calcium, we have vitamin D, it's more calcium that is probably useless. Because what we are forgetting here is that we need bioavailability and we need bioconversion. That means what our intervention in nutrition are doing is adding more, is correcting inadequacies, not necessarily correcting the deficiency. Because the deficiency is an interaction among many things. In the case of vitamin D, calcium requires vitamin D. In the case of that's the absorption. Bioconversion is the case of folic acid. Folic acid alone is not going to work if we don't have sufficient B2, niacin, B6, and B12. I mean, that is the complex type of thinking. But that is the way we do it. But let me now move into other things, because I'm talking about iron and folate. Some examples of indicators at all these levels. Exposure, I already mentioned. In the case of folate, we have this beauty of indicators with serum folate, to the point that we can estimate folate intake using serum folate concentration. If we move one up, it's because that is something that will tell us that that intake is making some changes. In the case of folate, it's the red blood cells folate, because it's the active folate inside the cells. That folate is in direct correlation with the reduction of RAL2 defects, which makes logical, because that is functional. Does not measure intake. In the case of iron, we have serum ferritin, and we have soluble transferrin receptors and others. Because those are going to change if the iron is inside and the iron is making the change. In functions, we like to measure anemia because it's easy to measure. But that is an indicator at the third tier of the system. Very easy to measure, very difficult to interpret. And the reason of that is because the sensitivity of these indicators could be the same, but the specificity is going down at the nerves stair. Because at the end, at the top, the RAL2 defects, we know that they respond to folic acid. We know the IQ responds to iron. This is iron deficiency. But at the end, we are not certain that is the only reason that those things have changed. That is, they are sensitive, but not specific. And that is happening with anemia in this case. What of these have been used in the countries? Barely anemia or hemoglobin. And with hemoglobin, we want to try to say many things to intervene. If we don't have the overall picture, we really cannot take wise decisions. I have seen countries that because they have high prevalence of anemia, they immediately provide more iron and folic acid sometimes. If they have a stunting and it's on the country where I was born in Guatemala, stunting rate is 50% for many years. And because we call stunting chronic undernutrition, the correction is giving more food with more energy and more protein. Probably that's not the reason of this problem, because we have not looked for the factors that is causing that problem. We need to look the causes and what we need to do the biomarkers. Talking about these biomarkers for iron status, we have transferrin receptor and we have ferritin. And you can see in these different countries, they don't respond to the same. Because once we are moving into the metabolic area, there are many interactions that is very difficult really to interpret. That is why for iron we need several of those, trying to combine, and we can say and estimate that we have or not iron deficiency. But that is for us working in the area that we need to do. Now going a little more practical, going to anemia. And I have heard, and I have seen some papers, that the anemia rates in Armenia have increased. That's what I think Dr. Bekemot said. I have some question in that, and I will say you what, I put in some of these graphs. I told you that I'm originally from Guatemala and all the data of the country very good. I collected only 3 DHSs of the country in 2009, 2013, and 2015. And you can see the different age groups, and you can see the prevalence of anemia. If you go only the group from 6 to 11 months, in the year 2009, 72%. In the year 2015, 25%. And the year 2015, 64%. To which value I believe. I participated in the DHS of the country in 1995. And the prevalence of anemia was 30% in that group. Then how on earth changed from 30 to 72 in the year 2009, when the country has improved in general? Then when we ask is, when we did the survey in 1995, we took venous blood. In the year 2009, they took finger prick blood and they used HemoQ. The HemoQ is a good machine. It's not bad. If you have a good sample from venous blood and you go to a hemocounter and you use the HemoQ, the result is more or less the same. But in the field, in finger prick, when the people do not have the experience, what happened in the year 2009, they are afraid to have the prick in the finger of the kid, and they barely make the little wound, and this blood barely is going out, and they squeeze the finger. When they squeeze the finger, then what happens is that they are going to push the plasma, and then the hemoglobin is going to go down. That happened in all the year 2009. If you see these values, that is unbelievable. It's not possible that that country has 40–50% anemia every place. If you go to the bottom, that was just last year, we make this noise, and now the ones who did the DHS were more carefully. Now they did the work well, and they now have different values. And those are the values. But it's still using finger prick. In the one in the middle was done by our CDC colleagues. They also did finger pricking. But instead of taking only the first drop, second drop from the finger, they dropped the blood into macrotrated tubes because they wanted to use some serum for doing analysis of other indicators. When they do that, they have 5 to 7 to 8 drops of blood in the tube. They mix that and they load into the macrocuvette of the HemoQ. And they see the value there. This is less than half like the other. That means we still need to start thinking that many of our deficiencies are based in our own methodologies, not because it's happening. And we need to review them, because our numbers are going to be taken for taking decisions. And if our numbers are incorrect, the decisions are going to be incorrect. The summary of this is that the 3 use finger pricking. But the one in 2013, which is the lowest, the blood was taken out and then loading in the microcuvette. Probably that is the most related to the reality. In the 2009, that was terrible because it was the milking of the finger. And the question is, it's another question, I'm going to mention this. The other point I'm going to show you is the reduction of anemia during when the kid is being older. If we move to the light blue one, which are the best data, below 1 year of age is 25% prevalence. From 12 to 18, 16% prevalence. And from 24 to 35, 10, 2, and 1. What was the intervention done? Nothing. Which means that we need to evaluate the cutoff points for those age groups. Probably we're using this cutoff points for hemoglobin to determine anemia is 110 milligrams per liter. But for children from 6 months to 59 months, is that number correct or not? I don't say probably we need to review the WHO cutoff points, because probably what is happening is that these kids are not so anemic, probably it's around 10, but we are classifying them as anemic because we are using a cutoff point that is a little high for them. So just keep that in mind in our work. In the case of folate, we have all of these things. I wrote a little paper where I summarize those. Those are taken from the literature. Those have been changing a little. But it tells us that we have biomarkers that we can use instead of having a more complicated type of indicator. With these biomarkers, because we have a way to transform them into index, we have here the equivalent in dietary folate equivalents at each different points. And in this folic acid is even less, which is an important point to tell you. Folic acid is absorbed 70% more than the dietary folate. And that is why we divide this by 1.7. That means the folic acid is easier to absorb than the dietary folate. So this is something for you to keep with you. But now let's see what this is serum folate in the ENHANCE of the United States. In the different age groups, and you can see that in the same family, there are different points. At the beginning, as I showed in Ecuador kids, the folate was high in the serum. It's dropped in the middle of the years of our life, and then go up again. And we need to know that things. We don't know. We are classifying every human being as the same, and we are not the same. For some reason, and probably self-replication, the small children absorb and transform folate better than us. And that is why they need more than this one. And this detail here, that could be because there is this non-equilibrium with vitamin B12, because when we age, the vitamin B12 is not well absorbed. We don't know. But this is important only for us to see that we are still learning, and all our indicators, all our recommendations are subjective to our actual knowledge. This graph here only shows us the corrections of folate deficiency in the United States. The clear ones are the folate, serum folate in the total population, males and females, before fortification with folic acid, and now this is the one. The folate is twice. That means that the deficiency was corrected, and the population is doing fine right now. Okay, let me go and try to finish my talk, trying to do some generalization. The question is, how much is too little and how much is too much? Probably many of you have already seen this graph. It's taken from the Institute of Medicine of the United States, the Academy of Science. And this is a very logical thinking. And any type of nutrient that we have, including water or sodium, if we want to put that, if we don't have nothing of that, we have 100% possibilities of dying or have an adverse effect. And the way we are increasing the intake of that nutrient, that adverse effect due to inadequacy is going down until we have the plateau that now we are finding. 50% of us will be sufficient at this time. That means with this intake here, that they say population minimum, if all of us are having this intake, half of us are going to be satisfied, but half of us are going to still to require a little more. That is why we increase to a standard deviation and we create this other variable here. This is the estimate other requirement. This is the recommended daily allowance. That is done only for satisfying the needs of those with the highest requirement of that nutrient. You see this thinking. In our labeling, we are using RDX. which means that we are more than plenty of the nutrient for everyone, because we are using a value which is high enough for covering the needs of almost everyone of the population. But we don't need that for everyone. I'm going to explain a little. If we have an additional intake, we reach a point here that now is excessive, and some of us that are very susceptible to that excess are going to start appearing the negative effects due to excesses. And we have a higher intakes, more and more of us, until every one of us will have the same impact. Then what is the objective? The objective is that because we don't know the requirements of every one of us, if we use the estimate average requirement as the minimum proportion for the population of the supply of that nutrient, and from that point is the distribution of the population. If we already knew what were our requirements, we don't need it in this. But because we don't know, we are having this distribution. It means that in order for every one of us has sufficient of that nutrient, most of us are going to have 2 to 3 times the values of the EAR. But that is fine. There's nothing bad about that, because it's still in the same range. And that is why we are using the EAR as the population minimum. For individual diets, we don't use that. We use the RDA, because that is the one, because we don't know our requirements, but that's an average for individuals. That's what we identify for the individuals. If we use the RDA as a cutoff point for the population, the problem is that we have a risk of certain of us going beyond. The key of this is that it is efficacious for the population to reach the EAR, and it is safe if that population do not reach the UN. That is, not having too little or not having too much. That means we have still a range to work. And for doing this, we need to add the diet, we need to add the supplements, we need to add the fortified foods. That is why the nutritional science is important. Let me put now the data for folate and folic acid. These are the values for healthy adult females. And these are the values. For the population is 320. For the RDA for individuals is 420. As I said, if we use folic acid instead of folate, we divide this by 1.7, and these are the numbers if we use folic acid, as the diet does not contain any folate. And the other extreme, at this time, we are only using US for folic acid, not for the diet. I mean, the normal folate in the diet is safe enough that we don't measure. We have put in here only for folate. But that is a reference value. For iron, on the other hand, it's a little more complicated, because that is going to depend the availability of the diet. Diets that are low availability, 10% availability, and 20% availability. This is a diet very rich in fiber and other whole cereals. This one contains some fruits and vegetables, and the 20% contains animal foods. All depends on the diet, then the values are going to change for adult females. From 25 to 6, that means in a population with a lot of meat and very low whole cereals, 7 milligrams of iron per day is sufficient as a population value, although we have some problems in the case of iron because the difference is too large. But in population that are eating only vegetables, they need much more iron. But that is the things that we need to have in mind. Okay, now, like my predecessors, the solutions. We know the diet, we know biomarkers, we do 24-hour recall, and then we have the nutrient inadequacies. What we do for correcting to having an optimal diet? The first thing that we do is dietary diversity. That means we need to improve the different food groups. That is the base, it's our natural way to do it. And including in that case breastfeeding. I mean, we need to look at it. But what happens if for cultural, ecological, or economical reasons we cannot provide the different food groups? We need to find different strategies. And we have a series of them. We can have mass fortification, we can have target fortification, and we can have supplementation. And mass fortification, that's commonly done in many countries, if they have centralized produced foods, and they have some way to control, and they can add some of these nutrients that could be missed and provide to the population. For certain specific needs, like complementary feeding, well, the kids need more nutrients than the rest of the family, we have these ones. Or when we are treating emergencies, we have the ready-to-use therapeutic foods. Or others, we have target fortification. In the last extreme, when nothing is working, we can do supplementation. But that is something that the country needs to decide. The mass fortification has a very large population coverage, although the nutrient content per serving size could be modest. But probably that amount is sufficient to make the change in the population. For supplements, we can provide a lot within a tiny proportion of the population, because we cannot give supplements to almost everyone. That is the balance that we need to keep. If we look to diets, and we are talking about iron and folate, where is the iron come from? The iron comes from mostly for fish, meat, and poultry. Most processed means higher the supply. Also, the vegetables produce to us iron, but those are in parentheses, because the human intestine is not made to take that iron out. The only way to take this iron out is giving to the chickens, to the cows, to the pigs, for them to transform and to put into the meat. If we don't do that, we can do fermentation. But if we don't do fermentation, there is no way that we can have sufficient iron if the diet is very rich in this iron absorption inhibitor, which, by the way, are the nutrients that we want for avoiding chronic diseases. Then we have whole cereals, which are very rich in fiber and phytic acid, which prevent chronic diseases but avoid the absorption of minerals. Folate, on the other hand, are the pulses, the nuts, and the seeds. Some liver, but the others are not too rich. That is why in Chile and the United States, this is a society that is folate deficiency. We don't know if the society here or society of those countries is in the same way, or probably not in a bad way like these other countries. Let me show this. This is the problem of the using the urbanization of the mills. We are using every time more sugar, every time more oil, every time more refined cereals, even rice. What happens when we do that, we have a very good source of energy, but empty in nutrients. And if in our diet these are a good proportion of our energy supply, we are in a trouble, because we avoid the nutrient-dense foods in order to have these things that are only giving the feeling of having food, but not the nutrients that we need. And my final graph is this one. Always in my presentations, I said that the principles are universal. What I tried to present here were principles. The decisions and the solutions are local. The only ones who could know what to do are the people in the country, because they are the only ones who know the context. No one can come and export solutions. The solutions should come from inside. But in this case, we are talking about micronutrients. We have three groups of solutions. We have the diet, food fortification, or supplementation. What are the basis of this? The principle of the diet is increase the nutrient content through the selection and appropriate combination of foods groups. We do that and we increase the nutrient supply. Food fortification, we incorporate micronutrients to edible vehicles. I'm not saying food, it's edible vehicle. The salt is not a nutrient, it's not a food, but we put something in the salt. And during the manufacturing process, because we are going to complement the diet. We are not making that instead of the diet. If that will not work, we go into supplementation, which are the syrups, the tablets, the powders, consumed with or without food, and that is some of the last resorts. The three of them are working under the same principle. The impact is due to the amount and the quality of the nutrients that are being supplied. That is the common thing. Nothing magic in the middle. Everything is going to be in the nutrient that we are giving. But we have programmatic efficiency. This is important. When a program is viable or not. And I put here some numbers only for comparison, which is feasible to do. The easiest to do is supplementation. That is why UNICEF, USAID, and others, we put supplement, because it's easy to put a pharmaceutical company to do the thing, and that's it, we solve the problem. But there's other things here. Food fortification, if we have centralized production, it's very difficult to change the diet, because we need production, we can other things. I mean, we need to have that in mind, that that's the best thing to do, but that requires a lot of more effort in production and in habits. Easy to deliver. What is the easy to deliver? Well, I put here, in my opinion, is this one because it's a few steps.